Why does it seem like the harder you try, the more they pull away? You send the message and wait. Then you start overthinking every word. You check your phone again and again, still nothing. So you try again, but stronger this time. You explain more. You give more attention. You show more emotion. And instead of getting closer, they feel further away, colder, more distant, harder to reach. And you start wondering why this is happening. Because right now, it feels personal. It feels like rejection, like you're being ignored, like you're not enough. And that feeling creates pressure inside you. So you react. You think, maybe if I block them, they'll finally realize my value. Maybe if I explain myself one more time, they'll understand. Maybe if I show even more love, they'll come back. But all of those reactions come from fear. Fear of losing them. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being forgotten. And fear has a pattern. It pushes you to act quickly. It makes you feel like you must fix everything right now or you'll lose it forever. So you move fast. You send long messages. You ask for clarity. You try to hold on tighter. But here's the hard truth. The tighter you hold, the more they slip away. Because you're not dealing with someone who responds to emotional pressure. You're dealing with someone who pulls back from it. People with avoidant patterns don't process closeness the way you do. When emotions rise, they don't lean in. They step back. When things feel intense, they don't feel connection. They feel trapped. So when you block them, it doesn't shock them the way you think. It often gives them relief and space. When you beg, it doesn't pull them closer. It overwhelms them. When you chase, it doesn't create attraction. It triggers their urge to withdraw. And then the cycle starts. You reach out, they retreat. You try again, they go quiet. You push harder, they disappear even more. And each time you feel a little more hurt, a little more confused, a little more like something is wrong with you. You start thinking you're too emotional, too intense, too much. But that's not the real issue. The truth is, you're not too much. You're just trying to receive love in a way that feels natural to you from someone who experiences closeness very differently. That mismatch creates confusion. You express love through closeness, words, and reassurance. But for them, too much closeness can feel like pressure, even if they care. So when you move closer thinking you're building connection, they feel like they're losing space. And for them, space equals safety. This is where things usually break down. You see distance and take it personally. You assume rejection. You assume loss. So you respond emotionally, trying to close the gap immediately. But that reaction adds more pressure, and it pushes them further away again. What could have been slow emotional connection turns into overload, and over time, something important happens. Your focus shifts completely onto them, their replies, their silence, their mood, their distance. Your emotional state starts depending on how they respond, and that's where you begin losing your center, because now you're not grounded anymore. You're reacting instead of choosing, waiting instead of living, chasing instead of standing still. And avoidant patterns pick up on that instantly. They feel the urgency, they feel the pressure. And instead of moving closer, they move back even more. They start feeling the pressure to respond, to explain themselves, to match the intensity you're bringing in. And instead of rising toward it, they pull back even further, colder, quieter, more distant, leaving you stuck in confusion. But here's where everything begins to shift. The moment you realize this isn't random, the entire situation starts to look different. It's not about finding better words. It's not about doing more or proving your worth. It's about understanding what actually creates connection and what quietly breaks it down. Because without realizing it, you may be reinforcing the very cycle that keeps pushing them away. And until that changes, nothing else really changes either. Not your effort, not your intentions, not your explanations. So before you send the next message, before you react again, before you try to pull them back in, you have to see the pattern clearly. Because once you do, you won't respond the same way again. What makes this even harder is that silence often feels worse than rejection. When someone avoids, they rarely communicate directly. They don't say they're overwhelmed. They don't admit closeness feels uncomfortable. They don't explain that emotional intensity triggers something they don't know how to handle. Instead, they become unclear. I'm busy. I need space. They reply normally one day and disappear the next. And that uncertainty is what keeps you mentally locked in. because the mind struggles more with confusion than with pain. Pain is clear, confusion is not. Pain has boundaries. Confusion keeps you searching, so your thoughts start looping. You replay conversations, you analyze tone, you look for hidden meaning. You ask yourself what changed, what went wrong, what you did, and that's how emotional attachment turns into emotional fixation. Not always from love, but from lack of clarity. This is where avoidant patterns become especially painful for people who feel deeply, because you're seeking honesty and emotional consistency, but the dynamic you're in doesn't give you either. So instead of feeling connected, you start chasing answers. But clarity cannot be forced from someone who avoids their own emotional discomfort. They may care, they may think about you, they may even miss you. But if they don't have the capacity to sit with emotional intensity, then anything deep inside them starts to feel overwhelming, and they instinctively step back from it. That's why they can seem close one moment and distant the next. Open, then shut down. Present, then gone. To you, it feels inconsistent. To them, it feels like self-protection. Because for an avoidant nervous system, intimacy often gets interpreted as pressure. Emotional closeness can feel like expectation, demand, or loss of independence. So when feelings start to deepen, their system reacts before logic does. They withdraw, they detach, they go emotionally quiet. And if you don't understand that, you'll misread everything. You'll think distance is a problem you need to fix. So you try harder, you reach more, you explain more, but the more you push, the more unsafe it feels to them. Not because your love is wrong, but because their system was never trained to hold steady emotional closeness without feeling overwhelmed by it. Many avoidant patterns come from earlier experiences where emotional needs weren't safely met, where independence became survival, where vulnerability didn't feel safe. So they learned to rely on themselves, to suppress needs, to stay in control. And even later in life, that internal system still runs in the background. So when real connection shows up, one part of them wants it and another part of them fears it. That inner conflict creates the hot and cold behavior that leaves you exhausted and confused. Desire pulls them in, fear pushes them out, and in most unhealed patterns, fear usually wins. This is also why over-explaining, over-giving, or over-proving rarely works. You may believe that if you love enough, stay patient enough, or explain yourself clearly enough, they will finally feel safe and choose you. But emotional availability doesn't develop through someone else's effort alone. And when you keep trying to hold the connection by overextending yourself, what often happens is quiet self-abandonment. You start losing sleep, losing focus, losing emotional balance. Their mood starts getting tied to notifications. Their sense of calm starts depending on someone else's availability, and that slowly stops feeling like love. It becomes something else, something closer to emotional captivity. It's what happens when your nervous system gets pulled into another person's inconsistency. You start living in reaction mode. One message gives you relief. One delay ruins your focus. One cold reply pulls you into overthinking. One small sign pulls you right back in. It can feel like passion, but often it's anxiety disguised as love, because real connection doesn't keep you guessing all the time. Real connection doesn't make you feel like you have to earn basic emotional presence. And real connection doesn't punish you for wanting clarity and honesty, and this is where things begin to turn back toward you. The moment you stop romanticizing what is actually destabilizing your peace, you start to wake up from it. Because if someone only feels okay when there's distance, the issue isn't your closeness. It's their unprocessed fear around closeness. That distinction matters, because once you see it clearly, you stop turning their behavior into your identity. You stop thinking, I wasn't enough, and you start seeing they weren't emotionally equipped. And that one shift can protect your sanity, because the deepest damage in these situations doesn't come from someone pulling away. It comes from what you start believing about yourself while they do it. You begin shrinking. You start questioning your worth. You start editing your emotions just to avoid triggering distance again. Less honesty, less expression, less of who you really are. And slowly, without noticing, you start abandoning yourself just to keep someone emotionally comfortable. One restrained message at a time. One swallowed feeling at a time. One I'm fine when you're not. Until one day, you realize you've been trying so hard to be easy to love that you stopped being yourself. And that should never be the cost of connection. You shouldn't have to disappear to be chosen. You shouldn't have to become emotionally smaller to stay in someone's life. If someone can only stay when you ask for nothing, feel less, and expect less, then that isn't real partnership. It's emotional convenience. And you were never meant to survive on that. But to see that clearly, you first have to break the spell. You have to stop treating their distance like a problem you need to solve. Because once you turn avoidance into a puzzle, you hand away your peace. You start overthinking every detail. What to say, when to say it, how to act, how not to act. And your entire emotional world starts revolving around someone who isn't even consistent with you. That is too high a price. What you actually need is not more effort. It's emotional discipline, the ability to stop feeding a pattern that keeps draining your stability. Because the solution isn't hidden in another message or another explanation. It starts the moment you stop reacting the old way. Real change begins when you stop trying to control the outcome. Because real power here isn't about getting them back. It's about not losing yourself while they pull away. Most people misunderstand strength. They think it's saying the perfect thing or sending the final message that changes everything. They believe the right words will fix emotional distance, but that mindset keeps you stuck because it still places your peace in their hands. The real shift is internal. It's self-control. It's the moment you feel the urge to chase, and you don't. It's the moment panic rises, and you don't feed it. It's the moment your heart wants to run after them, but you choose to stay grounded instead. That stillness is not weakness, it's self-respect. Most people can't do it. They react instantly, they text, they check, they chase silence just to escape the discomfort it creates. But growth begins when you stop using action to soothe anxiety. That is emotional discipline, not shutting down, not playing games, not becoming cold. Just refusing to abandon your own peace in response to someone else's inconsistency. And when you start doing that, something shifts. Your nervous system begins to settle. The panic quiets. The urgency fades. You stop making their behavior the center of your emotional world. And that changes your energy more than any message ever could. Because when you stop reacting, you stop being predictable. And predictable emotional reaction is often what unstable dynamics quietly depend on. They're used to people chasing distance, sending long messages, reacting emotionally, trying to pull them back in. That's the pattern they recognize: pursuit, pressure, escalation. So when that doesn't happen, when there's no overreaction, no emotional collapse, no attempt to force closeness, something shifts. The silence feels different, not cold or manipulative, just clean and unpressured. And that absence can feel heavier than words because the cycle is no longer being fed. Emotional patterns only survive when both sides keep participating. When one side steps out, the dynamic loses momentum. And that's why sometimes the most powerful move is not doing more, but stopping the cycle. When you stop chasing clarity from someone who can't regulate their own emotions, your focus returns to yourself. You become more grounded, less reactive, less available to chaos. That stability is noticeable, not because it's loud, but because it's rooted. There's a difference between control and self-respect. Self-respect means you stop abandoning yourself to maintain access to someone else. And that decision changes everything. You're no longer reaching from need or shrinking to stay connected. You begin valuing your own steadiness over temporary reassurance. If they return, it won't be because you chased them into awareness, but because your absence revealed reality. And reality always speaks louder than pressure. That's where clarity begins. Not how do I fix this, but is this right for me? If they come back, you'll see it differently. Not as validation, but as information. You'll notice how they return, what energy they bring, and whether anything has truly changed or if it's the same cycle repeating. This time, you're not led by hope, but by awareness. Once you step out of emotional chaos, you start recognizing patterns faster, the inconsistency, the distance under the words, the push and pull. You also start feeling it in your body, that tension or unease you used to ignore. Now you listen to it because it was never weakness, it was clarity. That's how you stay open without losing yourself. You're not asking, do they want me? You're asking, do they meet me where I stand? From there, only two things happen. Either they show up with real consistency and effort, or they don't. And either way, you're no longer confused. If nothing changes, you stop chasing potential and accept reality. That acceptance isn't defeat, it's freedom, because you understand love shouldn't destabilize you, and your peace shouldn't depend on someone inconsistent. You become grounded, selective, and intentional. And most importantly, you no longer need them to feel whole. You've already returned to yourself, and from that place, everything becomes a choice, not a need. The conclusion is that real clarity doesn't come from getting someone to change, explain themselves, or finally choose you. It comes from you stepping out of emotional chaos and returning to yourself. When you stop chasing inconsistency, you stop feeding the cycle that keeps you stuck in confusion. You begin to see people as they are, not as you hope they could be. And that changes everything. If someone comes back, you no longer meet them with desperation or fantasy, but with awareness. You observe their actions, their consistency, and their emotional effort. And if nothing has changed, you no longer force meaning or stay in uncertainty. You choose peace instead. The real transformation is internal. You stop abandoning yourself for connection. You stop confusing anxiety for love. You stop tolerating instability as something normal. And in that shift, your power returns, not because you controlled the outcome, but because you no longer depend on it. That's the ending truth. When you choose yourself fully, confusion loses its hold, and only what is real and steady can stay in your life.